الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, thumma alhamdulillah. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the countless blessings Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed upon all of us. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He has allowed us to complete day 1 of Ramadan of 2024. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He continues to bless us with many Ramadans in our lives. Allahumma ameen. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He places His infinite barakah, His infinite blessings and mercy upon the very food that we had in iftar. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives us the energy to worship Him properly. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to aid our Muslim brothers and sisters that don't have food for iftar during these difficult times that we're living in. Allahumma ameen. Dear brothers and sisters in Islam, our beloved Shaykh Muhammad, he recited in the first part of Taraweh some verses in Surah Al-Baqarah that I wanted to highlight today, inshallah. And if everyone is doing their homework when it comes to a juz' a day, I'm pretty sure you've come across these verses already on your own time. And if you have not, you will come across it today, inshallah, right now. These are one of my favorite verses. And if you've been to this masjid often, you hear me recite these verses often. Because these verses, sometimes if I may ask you, and I hope inshallah you do as a Muslim, you have a favorite verse. And I hope you have more than one. And for me personally, these verses are one of my top 5. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the answer into what we say in Surah Al-Fatiha every single day. More than 17 times in a day, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for one thing. And wallahi thumma wallahi, if it wasn't for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to force us to say this dua, we wouldn't want it. Because we're so busy making dua for dunya matters. We're so busy making dua for promotion of our job, for a good life in dunya, for wealth, for status, for family, for whatever it may be. Maybe you sprinkle a little bit of akhirah, maybe at the end, you sprinkle a little bit, but majority of our dua, I would say maybe 70 to 80% of our dua, all has to do with this dunya. 20% of it has to do with akhirah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forces a dua upon all of us, because He knows that if it wasn't for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to force us, we will not ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that. And what is that? Hidayah. It is guidance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one that can guide. This is why after we praise Allah, and we say, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ إِهْدِنَا الصِّرَاطَ الْمُسْتَقِيمِ. Guide us to the straight path. It is wajib upon you. It is a rukun of your salah. And if you don't recite Surah Al-Fatiha, your salah is invalid. That's how important guidance is to the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Before the ayah of إِهْدِنَا الصِّرَاطَ الْمُسْتَقِيمِ, we say, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. You alone we worship, O Allah. And you alone we seek assistance, meaning we don't ask anyone else for help. We only need your help, O Allah. Ibrahim alayhi salam, the Shaykh Muhammad, mashallah, he recited in Surah Al-Baqarah, a huge chunk of it speaks about the legacy of Ibrahim alayhi salam. For those that were here in my ta'aleem or my small talk about the lecture of Ibrahim alayhi salam, remember when he was chucked out of the catapult and the slingshot being thrown into the fire from the people of Babylon, when they threw him into the fire, that huge fire that took 40 days to burn, for 40 days for them to light up this fire, mid-air, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala waits and He wants to set an example with Ibrahim alayhi salam. Mikael goes to Mikael goes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the angel that is responsible of taking care of the weather. He says, Mata umiru an anzila alayhim al-matara. He says, when are you going to command me, O Allah, so I can make it rain down on the people of Ibrahim water, so that way the fire doesn't touch Ibrahim alayhi salam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, no, I want to set an example. Jibreel alayhi salam comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, says, send me, O Allah. Allah allows Jibreel alayhi salam to go down to Ibrahim alayhi salam and asks him, Alaka haja, do you need something? Ibrahim alayhi salam is the full definition of al-isti'ana, which is what we ask for as Muslims 17 times in a day. Ibrahim alayhi salam sees Jibreel alayhi salam, and Jibreel says, do you need something from me? And Ibrahim alayhi salam says back to the strongest angel one of the strongest creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When easily Jibreel could have helped him. But Ibrahim alayhi salam knew that only help comes from not even Jibreel. It can't even come from Mika'il. It can't even come from a strongest angel such as Jibreel. It has to come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And only Allah. So Ibrahim alayhi salam says, when Jibreel says to him, do you need any help? He says, as far as from you, I don't need help from you. But from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I need His help. That is the true definition of an isti'ana. And that is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the answer. We say, you alone we worship, O Allah, and you alone we seek your help. Allah tells us, you want that help? Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ista'inu. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, oh you who believe, seek assistance, seek my help in two things. Ista'inu bis-sabri was-salah. Inna Allah ma'as-sabirin. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says two tools that I leave off with you, O dear Muslim brother and sister in Islam. If you contain these two tools, if you possess these two tools in the rest of your life, you will have success in this dunya and the akhirah guaranteed. And that is as-sabr was-salah. That is patience and prayer. وَجَزَاهُمْ بِمَا صَبَرُوا جَنَّةً وَحَرِيرًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and I will reward them because of what they endured, what they held patiently for. Jannah, I will bless them with Jannah and silk garments in Jannah. Now dear brothers and sisters, we don't have that much time to give a full-on lecture about patience, but I want you to understand that patience breaks off into three categories. Patience number one is as-sabr ala ta'ah. Patience upon the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows it is hard for you to pray 5 times a day. He knows it's hard for you. He knows it's hard to fast about maybe 16, 17 hours in a day. He knows it's hard for you. He knows it's hard for you to do things that you're not used to doing. But you force yourself to begin to love these things. He knows it's hard for you. You have to have patience and endure that difficulty, because with every difficulty comes eases. That's the first. The very second category of as-sabr is as-sabr ala al-ma'asi. Patience on the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does this mean? This means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows you want to engage in haram. He knows you want to do it. You see everybody else do it, and you want to do it too. The temptations you have, the fighting the nafs that you have inside your heart, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees that, and He knows that, and He understands that, but you're holding back. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah ta'ala was asked by his son Abdullah, he said, Mata raha? He said, when are we going to relax, Dad? He saw his father being tortured over and over again, studying every single day. He said, Dad, when are we going to relax? And his dad said, Ar-raha takun fi awwali khutwatin fil jannah. He said, when we relax is when we take our first step into Jannah. That is when we're going to relax. As-sabr al-ma'asi. Number 3 is as-sabr al-fitan wal-ibtila. Patience upon calamity and trials and tribulations in your life, whether it be individually or globally as an ummah as we see today. You gotta have patience. We see the situation and the crisis that's going on in our brothers and sisters in Gaza. You gotta see the light at the end of the tunnel. I know it's hard to see. I know it's difficult to see. It's getting worse and worse every single day, but you gotta place your trust unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Isn't that what we're asking for? إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us these two tools, prayer and patience. If you have these two tools, you are successful. This is why when the Prophet ﷺ began explaining the great fitna of ad-Dajjal to his Sahaba radiallahu anhum, and he began to tell them how short the time will be in this life, the very first thing that they asked about was not, Ya Rasulullah, how will we prepare for ad-Dajjal? What can we do? What type of special dhikr that we can make to protect ourselves from ad-Dajjal? The very first question that they asked was a tool that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them. And they asked, Ya Rasulullah, when time is short like that, فَكَيْفَ نُصَلِّ حِينَ إِذٍ? How are we going to pray? That was their main concern. And if our main concern, because the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, may Allah be pleased with all of them, they have passed long and gone. and they had the tools to prepare themselves for Ad-Dajjal. I'm pretty sure whether it be us today or our children today or our grandchildren will witness Ad-Dajjal. Give them that tool, teach them that tool, educate them of these two tools of al-sabr wa salah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will promise you a good life in this dunya and a good life in the next life. You have al-sabr wal-fitn wal-ibtila. The best person to display this type of patience is none other than the father of all Bani Israel, and that is Yaqub alayhi salam. Sabrun jameel. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, beautiful patience. When he waited for 40 years to be reunited with his son Yusuf alayhi salam, did he ever give up? No. That reminds us as brothers and sisters today, when you're opening up your social media apps and you're turning on the TV and you're seeing our Muslim brothers and sisters die every single day, it's hard. Yaqub alayhi salam, when he lost his son, وَبْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ, he became blind out of the anxiety and depression that he went through because he was so sad that he lost his son Yusuf. But did he ever lose hope? Did he ever lose hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Did he ever despair? Did he ever give up in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Even the rest of his sons said, Dad, why do you still think about Yusuf? Why do you still? He said, Ya asafa ala Yusuf. Oh my dear Yusuf. And his other son said, Dad, this has been years, 40 years we're talking about. And yet he still had a sabr. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Sabrun jameel, beautiful patience. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this blessed month of Ramadan, we are learning two things. We are learning as-sabr, as-salah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that when we seek aid and seek assistance, that it only comes from Him and Him only subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept all of our good deeds, whether we do it major good deeds or minor good deeds. Ya Rabbal Alameen, out of your infinite mercy, accept all of them. O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of your infinite mercy, forgive us for all of our bad deeds, whether it be trivial small good deeds or whether it be big major good deeds. We ask you out of your infinite mercy, O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to forgive us. Wa jazakumullahu khair. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.